The gunshot was the last thing anyone expected on a Sunday morning. It ripped through the holy silence of the Willow Creek Church, a crack of thunder from a clear blue sky. Plaster dust, fine as winter snow, rained down from the ceiling. It settled on the open mouths and wide eyes of the congregation, a town frozen in a single shared heartbeat of shock. And then, nothing. Just the sound of a woman's breathing, ragged and raw. Abigail Harper stood at the altar. Her father's old revolver was still aimed at the ceiling, a thin curl of smoke rising from the barrel like a departing spirit. The wedding dress she wore, her mother's before her, was a shroud of yellowed lace, hanging loose on her thin frame. She lowered the gun. Slowly. Deliberately. The whole church gasped as the muzzle came to rest, pointing directly at the chest of the man who was supposed to be her husband. Nathaniel Thorne. He was a tall man, weathered by the Texas sun, with eyes as gray as a storm front. He was 40 years old, a widower, and the wealthiest rancher in the county, and he didn't so much as flinch. Sheriff Miller's hand went to his own pistol, but Thorne just raised a hand, stopping him cold. His voice was low, steady, a rumble of gravel that carried through the stunned silence. "If shooting me is what you truly want," he said, taking a step toward her, "then pull the trigger." Abigail's finger tightened. This was it. The moment she'd played over and over in her mind for days. The moment she took back her life. But she hadn't planned for this. For the calm in his eyes. There was no anger there, no fear. Just a deep, quiet sadness that seemed to mirror the storm raging inside her own heart. Her hand began to shake. "Go ahead," Nathaniel said, his voice softer now. He was so close the barrel of the gun nearly touched the fabric of his shirt. "It's your choice." Her father, Jeremiah Harper, scrambled from the front pew, his face a mess of fury and shame. "For God's sake, girl, have you lost your mind?" She didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on Nathaniel's, searching for the monster she'd been sold to. The tyrant who was buying her to settle a debt. But he wasn't there. With a sob she couldn't hold back, her hand fell. The gun lowered. Nathaniel carefully took the revolver from her trembling fingers. He broke it open, tipped out the cylinder's contents into his palm, and held up a single, solitary bullet for the whole town to see. "Only one shot," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "She never intended to kill anyone." He pocketed the bullet, handed the empty gun to the sheriff, and then did the most unexpected thing of all. He offered Abigail his arm. "Shall we continue?" he asked, as if nothing had happened. "Or would you prefer to postpone?" Tears cut clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. "Why aren't you angry?" she whispered. His eyes held hers, and for the first time she felt like someone was truly seeing her. "Because I recognize pain when I see it," he replied, his voice for her alone. "And I've seen it in the mirror often enough." But how could this wealthy rancher know anything about her pain? And what kind of man faces down a gun without a flicker of fear? The story didn't start with a gunshot. It started a week earlier, with the rhythmic thump of a mortar and pestle. Abigail stood behind the counter of the town apothecary, the only one for 50 miles. The air was thick with the bitter scent of willow bark, a smell she'd known her whole life. It was her mother's shop. Now it was hers. The shelves were lined with jars of dried herbs, tinctures, and salves. Remedies her mother had taught her. Secrets passed down in a worn leather journal that never left Abigail's side. At 19, she was the town's unofficial healer. People paid in eggs or firewood, or with promises of help mending the roof. Money was a ghost in Willow Creek. Everyone was just getting by. The bell over the door jingled, and Mrs. Winters hurried in, her little boy Tommy in tow. "His cough is back, Abigail. Worse this time." Abigail listened to the boy's chest, the familiar rattle in his small lungs. She mixed a sachet of thyme and honey, explaining how to brew it into a tea. "A dozen eggs will do when your hens are laying again," she said, waving away the woman's fumbled purse. After they left, a different cough echoed from the back room. a weaker, more fragile sound that always made Abigail's heart clench. Her sister, Sarah. She was 14, but looked younger, as delicate as a willow branch. She'd been born with a weak heart that kept her tethered to her bed, but her mind was sharp as a tack, always lost in a borrowed book. Abigail pressed a cool cloth to her sister's feverish forehead. "It's worse," Sarah gasped, her small shoulders shaking. The local doctor's remedies were useless. He'd found more comfort in a whiskey bottle than in medicine since the fever took their mother 3 years ago. The only real hope was a specialist in Austin, a man whose fees were more than Abigail could earn in a decade. The bell jingled again. "Rest," Abigail told her sister. "I'll be right back." She stepped back into the shop and froze. Her father stood swaying by the counter, the sour smell of whiskey clinging to him like a shroud. "Pa," she said, her voice cool, "we don't get paid till Saturday." He twisted his hat in his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "Abigail, we need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach turn to ice. "It's about Sarah," he mumbled, his voice low and shamed. "And you, and Mr. Thorne, Nathaniel Thorne, the rancher, the recluse. What did he have to do with them?" Her father's story came out in halting, broken pieces. He'd lost at cards, lost big. The saloon owner, a snake of a man named Victor Blackwood, owned his debt. And Blackwood had made him an offer. The debt would be wiped clean. Forgiven. All her father had to do was convince his eldest daughter to marry the wealthy widower, Nathaniel Thorne. "He's been looking for a wife," her father mumbled. "Someone educated. Someone to help around the house." "Help around the house?" Abigail's voice was dangerously quiet. "And what does Blackwood get out of it? Why does he care who Mr. Thorne marries?" Jeremiah shifted, his eyes darting around the small shop. "Blackwood's had his eye on Thorne's land for years. Says he has influence over Thorne, business dealings." The truth hit her like a physical blow, a cold, hard slap. "So you sold me," she said, the words flat and dead in the air. "You sold your daughter to clear a gambling debt." "It ain't like that," he protested, but his gaze slid away. "Thorne's a good man. He's wealthy. He can provide for you, for Sarah, too." He finally looked at her, his eyes pleading. "The arrangement. It includes medical care for her, the specialist in Austin." Abigail's anger died on her lips, replaced by the cold, bitter taste of a trap closing. Her sister was getting worse. The herbal remedies weren't enough anymore. Without proper care, she would die. "And if I refuse?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Blackwood will take the shop," her father whispered. "It was all I had left for collateral. You and Sarah. You'll have nowhere to go." The walls of the apothecary seemed to close in on her. Her mother's legacy, Sarah's home, their only sanctuary. "When?" she asked, her voice a thread. "Sunday," he said, his eyes on the floor. "Thorne's coming to meet you tomorrow." The next afternoon, the sound of a lone horse brought Abigail's head up from the shelves she'd been needlessly reorganizing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The bell chimed, and a man ducked his head to enter, his tall frame making the shop feel impossibly small. Nathaniel Thorne. He wasn't what she expected. His clothes were simple but well made. His face was weathered, lined by sun and hardship. And his eyes were old. They were deep-set and gray, and they seemed to take in everything at once. The neat rows of jars, the bundles of herbs, the worn counter. "Miss Harper," he said. His voice was quieter than she'd imagined. "I'm Nathaniel Thorne." "I know who you are," she replied, her chin high. He looked around the shop again. "Your mother's place. I remember her. She saved my foreman's life once. Rattlesnake bite." A faint smile touched his lips. "He still swears her poultice did more good than any doctor." The flicker of pride she felt was quickly extinguished by a hot wave of anger. "Did you come here to reminisce, Mr. Thorne?" she snapped. "Or to inspect your purchase?" His expression hardened. "Is that what you think this is? Isn't it? You're buying me from my father like a prize sow at the county fair." He took a deep breath, choosing his words. "I understand your anger, but I came to talk To meet you properly before Sunday." "How considerate," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "And what shall we discuss? The weather? Or perhaps how many sons you expect me to bear you?" A muscle tightened in his jaw, but his voice stayed even. "I thought we might discuss the conditions of the arrangement." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "I wasn't aware I had any say in the matter." "You always have a say, Miss Harper," he said, his gaze steady and intense. "I am not in the business of forcing anyone to do anything against their will. And yet here you are, taking advantage of my family's desperation." He sighed, placing his hat on the counter. "I'm offering a solution. Your sister needs care. I need—" He hesitated. "A wife," she finished for him. "A woman to warm your bed and manage your household." Color rose in his face, but it wasn't embarrassment. It was anger. "You think very little of me without knowing me at all." "I know enough. You're buying a bride half your age because no woman with a choice would have you." The words were cruel, and she knew it. She expected him to storm out, to call the whole thing off. Instead, he looked at her with a startling understanding. "You're frightened," he said quietly, "and lashing out is easier than admitting it." His simple honesty stole the breath from her lungs. She turned away, fussing with a jar of lavender. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked, her back to him. "A partnership," he replied, "not ownership." She turned back, skeptical. "What I'm proposing is a practical arrangement. You and your sister will have a home, security, and the medical care she needs. In return, I ask for your help." "Help with what?" A shadow crossed his face. "We can discuss those details later. This isn't a prison sentence, Miss Harper. It's a doorway. Perhaps not the one you'd have chosen, but a doorway nonetheless." He held her gaze. "And if you decide to refuse, I'll still ensure your sister gets the medical care she needs." She stared, searching for the trick, the lie. There had to be one. "Why would you do that?" "Because no one should suffer for another's mistakes." Just then, the curtain to the back room rustled, and Sarah appeared, leaning against the doorframe. "You must be Mr. Thorne," she said, offering a weak smile. "I'm Sarah." The hardness in Nathaniel's face vanished, replaced by a genuine warmth. He spoke to Sarah not as an invalid, but as an equal, listening intently as she spoke about the books she was reading. There was a gentleness in him Abigail never would have expected. When he left, he paused at the door. "I'm not looking for someone who sees me as a position, Miss Harper. I'm looking for someone who might someday see me as a person." That night, a violent coughing fit from Sarah's room brought Abigail running. She saw the telltale spots of blood on her sister's handkerchief, and her decision was made. This wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. But it was Sarah's only hope. Sunday morning dawned bright and cruel. Abigail dressed in her mother's yellowed wedding gown, the cold weight of her father's revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. A single bullet. Not a threat, but a symbol, a reminder that she still had one choice left to make. The walk to the church was a blur of pitying faces and whispers. Inside, Victor Blackwood sat in the second row, a smug, satisfied smirk on his face. And at the altar stood Nathaniel Thorne. As her father placed her hand in his, she felt the cold steel of the gun against her thigh, and the surprising warmth of his calloused hand enveloping hers. The minister's voice droned on, a meaningless buzz in her ears. When he asked if she would take this man, the world narrowed to a single point. All the fear, all the anger, all the resentment boiled over, and she pulled the gun. Now, in the aftermath, Nathaniel's question hung in the silence. "Shall we continue?" She looked at Sarah, pale with shock but not with judgment. She looked at Blackwood, whose face was a mask of fury. Then she looked back at Nathaniel Thorne, the man who had faced her gun without fear, who understood her desperation, who had offered a partnership instead of ownership. "Continue," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Let's finish what we started." The rest of the ceremony was a dream. They were pronounced husband and wife. He didn't kiss her. He simply offered his arm, and she took it. Outside, a wagon was waiting, already loaded with their meager belongings. As Nathaniel helped her onto the seat, Blackwood pushed through the crowd. "You've made a spectacle of yourself, Thorne," he boomed. "Taking a mad woman for a wife!" Nathaniel's body tensed, but his voice was like ice. "The only spectacle here, Blackwood, is your poor attempt to meddle in my affairs. Our business is concluded." A dangerous glint appeared in Blackwood's small eyes. "Is it? I wonder what the good people of Willow Creek would think if they knew what you're hiding up at that ranch of yours." A murmur went through the crowd. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Threats don't become you, Victor, especially empty ones." He flicked the reins and the wagon lurched forward, leaving the church, the town, and her old life behind. "What was he talking about?" she asked as the familiar buildings grew smaller. "What are you hiding?" Nathaniel kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Everyone has secrets, Mrs. Thorne," he said, and the new name sent a shiver down her spine. "Some are simply more complicated than others." She was married to a stranger, a man with enemies, a man with secrets, and they were heading straight into the heart of them. Thorne Ranch was a place of ghosts. The main house was a grand, two-story structure of stone and weathered wood, but it was slowly surrendering to time. Shutters hung crooked, paint peeled from the porch columns. Weeds choked what were once flower beds. It was a place that had been loved, once, a long time ago. A woman emerged from the house as they pulled up. She was old, with silver hair in a severe bun and a spine as straight as a rifle barrel. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. "Mrs. Thorne," Nathaniel said. "This is Martha Sullivan. She manages the household." Martha's gaze swept over Abigail, taking in the torn, dusty wedding dress. "Welcome to Thorne Ranch, ma'am," she said, her voice formal and cool. "I've prepared rooms for you and your sister." "Rooms?" Plural. Nathaniel must have seen the question in her eyes. "You'll have your own space," he said quietly, "for as long as you need it." This was not a normal marriage. Inside, the house was clean but strangely empty. No paintings, no photographs. It felt less like a home and more like a museum of forgotten lives. Martha led them upstairs to their rooms. Sarah's was pleasant, with a fire already lit in the grate. Abigail's room was larger, with a four-poster bed, a writing desk, and a wardrobe. But what caught her eye was a bookshelf along one wall. It was filled with books. Not fancy leather-bound sets, but well-used volumes with cracked spines, medical texts, botanical journals, books Abigail had only dreamed of reading. "Mr. Thorne had these brought in yesterday," Martha explained, her voice softening for the first time. "Said you might find them useful." Abigail ran a finger along a title. "These are expensive." "The master has always valued knowledge," Martha replied, a hint of pride in her voice. "Martha," Abigail began carefully, "how long have you worked for Mr. Thorne?" The woman's expression shuddered. "Long enough to know he deserves more respect than he received today." So she knew about the church. "You had your reasons, I'm sure," Martha said, her tone cool but not unkind. "But so does he." "Reasons for buying a wife?" Abigail couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Martha's eyes flashed with a surprising fire. "Is that what you think happened? That man has never bought anything he couldn't earn himself, least of all a person." Before Abigail could ask more, Martha excused herself, leaving Abigail alone and more confused than ever. This man, her husband, was a living contradiction. A man of wealth who wore a patched suit to his own wedding. A man who bought a wife but gave her a separate room and a library of priceless books. And a man whose housekeeper defended him with the loyalty of a soldier. As she unpacked, she saw him through the window, standing alone at the edge of the garden. He was staring out at the vast, empty prairie as the sun went down, a solitary figure etched against the dying light. He looked like the loneliest man in the world. Supper was a quiet, awkward affair. Nathaniel, Abigail, and Martha sat at a dining table that could have seated 20. The silence was broken only by the clink of silverware and Martha's practical explanations of the household routine. Abigail asked about the weed-choked garden plot she'd seen. "That was Mrs. Thorne's garden," Martha said, then stopped, a flush rising on her weathered cheeks. "The previous Mrs. Thorne." An uncomfortable silence descended. Abigail glanced at Nathaniel. His expression hadn't changed, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. "You're welcome to use it," he said, his voice flat. Suddenly, a thump and a cry from upstairs sent Abigail leaping to her feet. "Sarah!" She and Nathaniel reached the room at the same time. Sarah was on the floor, a shattered water glass beside her. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I got dizzy." "You're never a bother," Nathaniel said, his voice gentle as he knelt to pick up the broken glass. His quiet sincerity was jarring. It didn't fit the image of the cold, remote rancher she had built in her mind. After Abigail helped Sarah back into bed, Nathaniel did something else unexpected. "I'll sit with her," he offered. Abigail hesitated, then nodded, fetching her herbs to make a calming tea. When she returned, Nathaniel was talking to Sarah in a low voice, and her sister was smiling. He was telling her about a remedy his own mother used to make. When Sarah finally drifted off to sleep, Abigail and Nathaniel slipped out into the hall. "Thank you," she said, breaking the awkward silence. He just nodded. "She reminds me of someone I knew once." "Your wife?" The question was out before she could stop it. Something in his eyes shut down. "No, someone else." He turned to go. "Good night, Mrs. Thorne." "Mr. Thorne!" she called after him. He paused. "My name is Abigail." A flicker of something. Surprise? A smile? Crossed his face. "Good night, Abigail." She watched him walk down the hall to his own room, a man who seemed determined to keep a chasm between them. Lying in her own bed, staring into the dark, Abigail was more lost than ever. Who was this man she had married? What secrets were hidden in the silent, empty rooms of this house? Blackwood's threat echoed in her mind. "What you're hiding up at that ranch of yours? Was it just a bluff? Or was there something else here? Something darker than an old grief?" A sound drifted through the stillness of the house, faint, ghostly, the sound of piano music, and somewhere, in another part of the house, a terrible, racking cough. But it wasn't Sarah. The next morning, Abigail was determined to get answers. But the ranch house kept its secrets close. Over a solitary breakfast, she was startled by a young woman with kind eyes and braided dark hair, carrying a basket of linens. "Pardon me, Senora," she said, her eyes wide. "I am Rosa." Abigail noticed a bundle of dried herbs tucked into the basket. "White horehound," she identified, her healer's instincts kicking in. "Good for coughs." Rosa looked surprised. "You know plants. These are for Miss Elizabeth." "Elizabeth? Who is Elizabeth?" A look of pure panic crossed Rosa's face. I should not have. Please, forgive me." She all but fled from the room, leaving Abigail with a new name and a deepening mystery. She found Martha in the library. "Who is Elizabeth?" Abigail asked directly. The older woman's face was a mask. "Some questions are better asked of your husband." Just then, the same terrible coughing from the night before echoed from upstairs. It came from the far end of the hall, a part of the house Abigail hadn't explored. Martha set down her dustcloth. "Excuse me, I'm needed." She hurried away before Abigail could follow. Abigail went to check on Sarah, who was awake and looking brighter. "I heard it too," Sarah said. "The coughing, and the piano music last night. This house is full of sad sounds, Abby." Driven by a need to understand, Abigail went exploring. At the far end of the upstairs hall, she found a locked door. A small table stood beside it, holding a tray with several medicine bottles. Laudanum, a tincture of wild cherry bark, potent remedies for a serious illness. She heard footsteps and turned to find Martha, her expression hard. "This area is private, Mrs. Thorne." "Someone is sick," Abigail insisted. "I'm a healer. Let me help." "This matter is being handled," Martha said, her voice like stone. "Is it Elizabeth?" Abigail pressed. Is she behind this door? Martha's face was a storm of conflict. These are questions for your husband, she repeated, collecting the tray. You'll find him in the stables. The stables smelled of hay and horses. She found Nathaniel in a stall, his sleeves rolled up, tending to a pregnant mare. He looked different out here, more at ease, more alive. Nathaniel, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Who is Elizabeth? He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Finally he sighed, a sound of deep weariness. Elizabeth is my sister, he said. She's been ill for a long time. A sister. No one in town had ever spoken of a sister. What's wrong with her? His jaw tightened. Consumption. The word hung in the air, heavy as a death sentence. The doctors gave her 6 months. That was 2 years ago. I want to meet her, Abigail said. I can help. He shook his head. She's uncomfortable around strangers. I'm not a stranger. I'm your wife. The words felt bold, but true. Is this why you married me? Not for a wife, but for a healer? For my knowledge? The question hit its mark. I married you, he said, his voice low, because you needed security, and I needed someone with compassion, someone who could understand. He could have just hired her, but he was right. She never would have come. Not to the home of the strange, reclusive Mr. Thorne. The pregnant mare shifted, and the moment of intensity was broken. For the next hour they worked together, helping the mare deliver her foal. In the shared, silent work, Abigail saw a different side of him, a gentle, capable man. When the foal finally stood on wobbly legs, a genuine smile transformed Nathaniel's face, wiping away years of grief. I would still like to meet your sister, Abigail said quietly into the newfound peace. As your wife. He looked at her, a long, searching look. I'll speak with her, he said finally. The decision must be hers. As they walked back to the house, he admitted that it was Elizabeth who played the piano when her strength allowed. He told her that Martha had been his first wife's nurse during the war and had stayed on to help care for Elizabeth. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a picture of a household bound together by grief and duty. That night after dinner, he finally told her the whole story. They sat in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth. I owe you honesty, Abigail, he began. He explained that Elizabeth's existence was a secret. After his first wife, Rebecca, had died, vicious rumors had started in town, spread by Victor Blackwood. Rumors that Elizabeth's illness was contagious, that she was dangerously insane. Consumption sometimes affects the mind, he admitted. She has episodes, periods of confusion. She's not a prisoner, Abigail. She's a beloved sister who is very ill. Blackwood knew just enough to twist the truth. He wanted the ranch, and he was using Nathaniel's love for his sister as a weapon against him. And Rebecca? Abigail asked softly. His face was a mask of controlled pain. Rebecca didn't die of consumption. She died of pneumonia. She was a nurse. She worked herself to death trying to find a cure for Elizabeth. He looked at her, his gray eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it stole her breath. That's why I needed someone like you. Someone with strength and compassion. Someone who could understand. The truth was more tragic than anything she could have imagined. This wasn't a transaction. It was a desperate attempt to hold his family, his world together. Before she could respond, a crash from upstairs shattered the quiet. Martha's voice cried out for help. They ran. The sound came from the east wing, from Elizabeth's locked room. Martha was fumbling with the key, her face tight with alarm. She's having an episode, a bad one. Nathaniel took the key, unlocked the door, and swung it open. The woman inside was a wraith, painfully thin, her dark hair wild, her eyes burning with fever. She was pacing, lost in a memory of the war. They're coming, she cried. So many wounded. We can't save them all, Rebecca. She saw Nathaniel and broke off, confused. Nathan? But I saw you fall. I'm here, Beth, he said, his voice impossibly gentle. You're safe. but she didn't know him. She was lost in the past, in the blood and horror of a field hospital. Her words dissolved into a racking cough, and he was at her side in an instant, supporting her as she bent double. Abigail's training took over. "Get her to the bed," she ordered, her mind racing. She saw the medicine bottles on the nightstand. One, a dark liquid without a label, made her frown. "What is this?" she asked Martha. "Dr. Montgomery's medicine, for when the coughing is severe." Abigail uncorked it, smelled it, and her blood ran cold. The dosage was dangerously high. It was likely causing the very confusion and agitation it was meant to treat. She looked at Nathaniel, who had been watching her every move. "With your permission," she said, "I'd like to try something gentler." He didn't hesitate. "Do what you think is best." For the next hour, Abigail worked. She created a steam tent with healing herbs to ease Elizabeth's breathing. She brewed a warm, sedative milk. As the panic receded from Elizabeth's eyes, they were replaced by a weary clarity. She looked at Abigail. "You're Nathan's new wife," she said, her voice a weak rasp. "The one who fired the gun." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He said you were different. Brave, like Rebecca, but you fight with fire." Her eyes began to close, the sedative taking hold. As Nathaniel tucked her in, she whispered, just loud enough for Abigail to hear, "I like her, Nathan. She doesn't look at me like I'm already dead." In the hallway, Nathaniel turned to her, his face etched with a gratitude so profound it needed no words. "Abigail isn't Rebecca," she heard him tell a worried Martha as she walked away. "And perhaps that's exactly what Elizabeth needs. What we all need." Lying in bed that night, Abigail realized she hadn't found a prison. She'd found a home full of broken people, a home in desperate need of a healer. And healing, after all, was what she was born to do. A quiet rhythm settled over Thorn Ranch. Abigail spent her days in Rebecca's old garden, coaxing medicinal herbs back to life. She worked in the still room, her mother's journal open beside her, mixing tinctures and salves. And she spent time with Elizabeth. The episodes became less frequent, less severe. In the periods of clarity between them, Abigail discovered a woman of fierce intelligence and sharp wit, trapped in a failing body. One afternoon, Elizabeth asked to speak with her alone. "I want to know who you are," Elizabeth said, her gray eyes searching Abigail's face. "The woman, not the healer." She told Abigail about Nathaniel's past, about the war that had left him a ghost, and the wife, Rebecca, who had brought him back to life with her stubborn love. "Rebecca worked herself to death trying to save me," Elizabeth said, her voice raw with a grief and guilt that mirrored her brother's, "and Nathan has been trying to atone for it ever since." She gripped Abigail's hand, her fingers surprisingly strong. "I am going to die, Abigail, soon, and when I do, Nathan will either wither away in this house of memories, or he will find a reason to live again." Her eyes burned with a desperate plea. "I'm not asking you to save him. I'm asking you to see him, truly see him." The weight of her request was crushing, but Abigail was beginning to understand. Later that day, a rider galloped up to the ranch, his face grim. Blackwood was in town. He was spreading lies, telling everyone that Elizabeth had become violent, that she was a danger to the public. He was using the old rumors to try and force the town council to have her committed to an asylum. "He knows the bank just approved my loan to expand the ranch," Nathaniel said, his voice tight with fury. "This is his last desperate move to force me to sell." "I'll ride with you," Abigail said without hesitation. "They'll have to listen to me. I'm her healer." Nathaniel looked at her, a mixture of surprise and something else, something warmer in his eyes. "You would do that? Publicly align yourself with us?" "I already did," she said simply, "when I married you." Willow Creek was a town on edge. Conversation stopped as they rode down the main street. Faces were shuttered, uneasy. The town hall was already packed. Blackwood stood near the council members, a smug look on his face. He'd brought the new, ambitious Dr. Hayes to back up his claims. Blackwood spun his tale of a violent, deranged Elizabeth, threatening a ranch hand with a fireplace poker. A complete fabrication. That's a lie, Nathaniel stated, his voice ringing with cold fury. Dr. Hayes, who had never once met Elizabeth, then spoke with great authority about the symptoms of cerebral tuberculosis, confirming that such violent outbursts were to be expected. It was Abigail who stood up, her voice clear and steady in the tense room. Dr. Hayes speaks of textbook theories, she announced. I speak of the patient. I have been treating Elizabeth Thorne daily. Her episodes are moments of confusion, not violence. She is ill, not insane. Mrs. Winters, whose son Abigail had cured, spoke up from the council table. I've known Abigail since she was a girl. Her mother saved my son's life. If she says Elizabeth isn't dangerous, I'm inclined to believe her. The tide began to turn. The council, faced with Abigail's first-hand testimony against Blackwood's unproven slander, agreed to table the matter until the trusted Dr. Montgomery could give his assessment. Blackwood was furious. As they left, he cornered them, his face purple with rage. "This isn't over, Thorne," he hissed. "Your precious sister won't live forever. And what will keep you then? Your pretty new wife? How long before she realizes she's made a terrible bargain?" Before Nathaniel could react, Abigail stepped forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice low and cutting, "you seem to have misunderstood something. I didn't marry Nathaniel Thorne because I was desperate. I married him because I recognized in him integrity, compassion, and loyalty. Qualities you would find utterly foreign." She took Nathaniel's arm. "Now, if you'll excuse us, my husband and I have a long ride home, to our ranch, the one that will never be yours." They walked out into the sunlight, leaving Blackwood speechless behind them. They rode home in the golden light of evening, the silence between them comfortable, charged. As they crested the last hill, the ranch house came into view, bathed in the sunset. It looked like a promise. It looked like home. That night, on the porch, under a sky full of stars, Nathaniel took her hand. "What you said to Blackwood today," he asked, his voice hesitant. "Did you mean it?" She looked at him, at this quiet, strong man who had carried so much grief alone. "Every word," she said. He gently touched her cheek. "I've been alone so long," he whispered. "I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "Then we'll remember together," she said, and he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of promise, a gentle, tentative beginning. "Tomorrow," he said when they finally drew apart, "I'll show you the North Ridge, a place for a new house, a place that's ours, a fresh start. A fresh start." Abigail knew there were still storms to face. Elizabeth's illness was a shadow that would not leave them, and Blackwood was not a man to accept defeat. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. They would face it all together. Two broken people who had been sold into an arrangement and had found, against all odds, a partnership, a friendship. And, she realized, as he took her hand and led her inside, the unmistakable, terrifying, and beautiful beginnings of love. If you enjoyed this story of justice and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next.